Hello, my name is Holly Bush. I write American historical romance. I have a new series coming out. The first book in the series is a novella. It's called Into the Evermore. It was previously part of the anthology Christmas in America. That anthology has gone away with the holidays. So Into the Evermore is now a standalone novella. It is available for pre-order at all your favorite retailers. And it will be for sale on April 4th. The first full book in the series is called For the Brave. It is going to be available in May, and it'll be on pre-order shortly, perhaps by this week. I'd like to read a little bit for you of my of Into the Evermore, just the opening scene. I think it's an exciting scene, and I think you may enjoy it. It is November 1842. It's set in Virginia. This is chapter 1. $20 and you can have her. Don't make no never mind to me what you do with her. I just want to see the gold first. The filthy-looking bearded man waved his gun in every direction as he spoke, including at the head of the young woman he held in his arms and at the three men in front of him. The trio all had handkerchiefs covering the lower part of their faces and hats pulled down tight, revealing 6 eyes now riveted to the pistol as it honed in on one random target after the other. The woman was struggling, although it was a pitiful attempt, as she was clearly exhausted and maybe hurt. The wind whipped through the trees, blowing the dry snow in circles around them. Beauregard Gentry watched the grim scene play out as he peered around a boulder down into a small ravine. He'd been propped against the sheltered rock, dozing and thinking he'd best start a fire, when he heard voices below. "Ain't paying $20 in gold for some used-up whore," one of the masked men said. The filthy man wrenched his arm tighter around the woman and put the gun on her temple. "Tell him, girlie, tell him you ain't no whore." She shrank away from the barrel of the gun and moaned. "Please, mister, let me go," she begged. "Tell him you ain't no whore." She shook her head and pulled at the filthy man's arm around her waist. "I'm no fallen lady," she whispered. I'm just... The woman went limp, and Beau thought she'd fainted, but instead she vomited into the snow in front of her. He watched her choke and gag, bent over the man's arm, and that's when he realized she was barefoot. Beau leaned back against the rock and checked his pistols and shotgun beside him. He hoped his horse wouldn't bolt from the tree she was loosely tied to when the bullets started to fly. It'd be a long walk back to Winchester if she did, especially as he'd most likely be carrying the woman. "Shit," he muttered. "Shit and damnation. She doesn't have any goddamn shoes on." From his angle, he'd need to drop the 3 bandits with the 2 shells from the shotgun and finish off any of them still breathing with one of his pistols. They'd be surprised and hopefully slow if the liquor smell floating on the wind meant anything. He was counting on the filthy man being hampered by the woman struggling. He was hoping she didn't get shot in the crossfire, but then she'd be better off dead than facing what was in store for her if the filthy man was the victor. The argument over the gold was getting heated. He could hear, making this as good a time as any. The snow fell away from the fur collar and trim of Beau's coat as he stood, lifted the shotgun to his shoulder, and aimed at the first man. He pulled the trigger, sighted in the second man, and pulled the second trigger right after the other, marching forward through brush and snow, letting the shotgun fall from his hands as he went. 2 of the men dropped, and the third fell to his knees, aiming his pistol at Beau as he did. Beau lengthened his stride and pulled a pistol from his waistband as he made the clearing, raised his left arm straight, and dropped the kneeling man to the ground with a shot to the face, letting the spent weapon fall to the ground. As he turned, he pulled his new fighting knife free of its scabbard and brought his right hand up, wielding a second pistol, sidestepping to get an angle on the filthy man. "She's mine. You ain't getting her." "Drop the gun." $20 in gold and you can have her." He wondered how much longer the woman would last. She was white-faced except for the dirt, and her hair hung in clumps, matted together with blood. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. She raised and lowered her arms as if paddling in a pool of water. Most likely she was long past terrified and all the way to hysterical. "Fine," Beau said. "You want $20? The filthy man nodded, and Beau dropped his knife in the snow and reached his hand in his pants pocket, as if intending to retrieve a gold piece. The man lowered his weapon by an inch or so as his eyes followed Beau's hand, and in that moment Beau brought up his right hand and fired his weapon. The bullet tore through the man's neck, sending blood gushing into the snow as the man tumbled sideways, releasing the woman. She fell in the opposite direction, covered in spattered blood, clawing and crawling away from her captor, turning on her back and shoving off in the mud and snow with bleeding feet, pushing herself away. Her cry echoed in the silent, cold night. Beau pulled his knife from the snow, kicked away the filthy man's gun, and walked to where he lay, now writhing as he slowly drowned in his own blood. The hair on the back of Beau's neck stood, and he turned. The last of the three men, missing part of his cheek and ear, had retrieved a loaded pistol from the belt of one of his companions and was now aiming it at Beau with shaking hands. Beau released the knife with a whip of his wrist, landing it dead center on the man's chest. He turned to the woman and watched as her eyes rolled back in her head and she crumbled the last 4 or 5 inches until her back hit the forest floor. Eleanor awoke suddenly, her eyes opening fully, having no idea where she was, or the time of day, or even what day it was. Panic hit her as she felt the weight of something over her body. Danger and death had hung over her since that day, since everything dear and known to her was taken from her. Had she been sold? She took a deep breath and tried to wrap her mind around the reality of it, around the fact that she was someone's property rather than a living, thinking person on her own. She sniffed the air and her nose was tickled by fur. It was then she realized the weight she felt was furs or blankets, tucked around her tightly up to her chin. Could she be warm? Her head pounded a slow beat in her ears, and any movement exaggerated the ache. Her feet were burning as if she were stepping on coals. She noticed a fireplace with a roaring fire on the other side of the small room, and there was a person, a man, kneeling in front of the fire, poking it and adding logs as he did. Who was he? Her thoughts were muddled and her memory as random as the sparks shooting from the new wood. He turned then and looked at her. Her hands fought their way out from under the heavy robes, and she shrieked, every muscle and bone in her body prepared to defend itself from whatever new danger he presented. She knew she was moving much too slowly, but she couldn't squeeze one more bit of energy to even prop herself up, if not climb out of the bed and run for her life. "Shh," he said without standing or making any movement. "Steady now. I'm not going to hurt you." Eleanor was taking in short breaths, and she could feel her heart racing. Tears came to her eyes as she thought about her own death, hopefully quick, as her mother's had not been. She was ready to meet her Maker and be reunited with her family. She had lived a good life, a good and dutiful life, and she was lucky, she knew, to be the daughter of Gordon and Olivia McManus. But now she longed for peace, for her Savior's grace that would heal her suffering and fill her fearful heart with calm. She watched the man stretch out to his full height, turn and seat himself in a chair near the fire. He rocked slowly, back and forth, back and forth. He had both hands on the arms of the chair and his feet firmly planted on the floor. He wasn't even looking at her. In fact, his eyes were drifting shut. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Beauregard Gentry, originally from Concordia Parish, Louisiana. Left there 5 years ago with an uncle to help him with a lumber mill left to him by his wife's side of the family after her and her parents' death. The business was contested by a distant relative, and Uncle Chester and I decided to head to Canada to try our hand at the fur business. He took a chill 6 months past and died." Eleanor listened intently as his accent was unique to her ears. She got the feeling he was telling the story for her benefit, to calm her. He returned to rocking when he was finished, back and forth, back and forth. She was staring at him, and he turned his head to her. "Would you like some water? Are you thirsty?" She nodded. "I'm going to stand now and fill that cup there from the bucket. I'm going to set it down now near your bed. Do you think you can drink it yourself?" She nodded again, eyes glued to him as he slowly stood and walked to the dry sink. He poured water in a wooden cup in turn. She was suddenly parched, as if mention of water made her mind connect with the needs of her body. He walked around the edge of the room away from her until he came to the table near her bed. He sat the glass down and slid it to her with one finger. He backed up and sat down in the chair. She pushed herself up on her elbows and licked her lips. She touched the cup with a trembling hand and concentrated on gripping it without spilling its contents. She drank greedily. She sat it down on the table and lay back on the pillow, pulling the warm blankets up to her chin. She could not stop the tear that fell down her temple and into her hair. "What are you going to do with me?" "I'm going to take you wherever you need to go." Eleanor shook her head, staring at the wood ceiling as she did. "There's nowhere for me to go." "There's got to be somewhere for you to go. Shit, there's somewhere for everybody to go." "No, there is nowhere for me," she whispered and closed her eyes. So that's the beginning of the story of Eleanor and Beau Gentry, 1842 in the wilds of Virginia. They build a life together, and they build a horse racing business. And the next book is their youngest son, Matthew Gentry. It will be his story. The following story will be Olivia, their daughter's story. I hope you enjoyed this little preview of the book. It is available of the novella. It is available for pre-sale for 99 cents at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, iTunes, and Kobo. Thanks for listening, and you can always check in with me at hollybushbooks.com or on my Facebook page at hollybushbooks. Thanks.